I am turning 34 this year, and one of my fondest childhood memory was the weekends. My parents used to drop me off at my relative video game store where I could play any game I wanted until 6 p.m. This store was a little bit different from the Western video game store that sell official games and the latest console. Here in Southeast Asia, a video game store refers to a small building where you can pay an hourly rate to play any game you want. It's similar to an internet cafe but with a video game console and computers. The atmosphere, however, resembles an arcade, with kids occasionally yelling at each other when things get intense. The sound of the video games crashing into each other resonates from the CRT TV, as it's not uncommon for headphones to not be provided back then. At the front of the store, there's usually a small minibar selling a variety of snacks, and strangely enough, always a Pepsi-sponsored fridge with a Coke inside. Back then, I used to play a lot of bullet hell shooter games, and sometimes I would also play platformers like Crash Bandicoot and Super Mario World. However, one day when I arrived at the store, I saw everyone playing a game with a guy wearing a jacket and wielding a sword fighting a giant dinosaur. He may have a scar on his face, but I wasn't quite sure since he looked pretty pixelated back then. I asked my relative if I could also play that game as well, and they told me the game is called Final. In our country, we have a habit of giving things nicknames by shortening their names, just like the game Winning 11 or Pro Evolution, as you might know it. We call it just Winning, and Final is of course a nickname of Final Fantasy. Specifically, the game we're talking about right now is Final Fantasy VIII. Loading up the disc into the PlayStation 1 and hearing that iconic sound, my heart started racing. When I pressed that start button, I was completely blown away. However, after a few minutes, I suddenly screamed out loud, saying that the game sucked, and everyone looked at me strangely. Firstly, what are you supposed to do in this game? Where were you supposed to go, and what the hell was anyone saying in this game? At that time, I was playing the Japanese version since the English version hadn't been released yet, but it wouldn't have made any difference anyway since I had no knowledge of either language. After that day though, I never had the inclination to play that stupid final game again. It was trash to me. Post-secondary from the elementary school, my folk opted to enroll me in an international school for English proficiency. Among the trendy kids there was a common possession, a compact gadget known as a DigiVice. No, I'm not referring to the one that gained popularity. I'm specifically talking about the rectangular device that honestly had an appealing appearance to me. As a child, it's ranked among the coolest thing I ever owned. However, unlike my friends who possess robust and impressive Digimon, I always ended up with the comical thesis-themed characters, and I never comprehend what went wrong. One day, I caught sight of a gathering of skilled Digimon players. As I approached them, my eye fell upon a book featuring a War Greymon on the covers. The title Botsarup on its front, though the literal translation to English was Conclusion. A more suitable rendition would be The Comprehensive Guide, but that's beside the point. That book must hold a secret to their adeptness in raising Digimon, right? Yet, when I requested a glimpse, they declined. I'm not sure if you can relate, but withholding information was seen as exceptionally cool thing among Thai kids back then. Nevertheless, that wouldn't deter me. That evening after school, I ventured to the bookstore in pursuit of the same book, and behold, it was there. However, it bore a slight different appearance, showcasing an alternate Digimon on its cover. Much like the game store of Thailand during that era, numerous unauthorized guides were being sold across the nation. Within those pages lay all the game's related information, enabling me to compete against the other kids. At that moment, I hadn't yet realized, but this book would be my gateway back into the realm of JRPG once more. Moving toward the year 2000, while paying a visit to a friend in a senior dormitory, I noticed a group of people gathered around the only television in the dorms, and on the screen was a colossal airship gratefully soaring through the sky along a bustling city filled with individuals of diverse races. And that moment, my heart raced one more. A familiar sensation, although I couldn't recall when I had last experienced it at that time. As the cutscene concludes, the gameplay begins, featuring Zidane entering a dimly lit room and engaging in his first battle. The enthralling battle themes started playing, along with the familiar party lineup formation. Taking in the game format and presentation, I approached one of the senior students and inquired about the game title. Final 9, he responded. In my mind, I was thinking about that time I had no idea what to do and where to go when I play Final Fantasy VIII. But then a voice interrupted my thoughts. Choose the first option to agree to watch the alleyway for the rat boy. One of the guys read out loud from a guidebook he held. Then follow him through the alleys as he assists you in sneaking into the palace to watch the show, providing instruction to the senior holding the controller. And before I knew it, I was captivated. Unable to tear myself away, I yearned to know what would unfold next. As the adventure takes us through many landscapes, entering and exiting many different towns that have their unique culture. But the most exciting thing is when you recruit new members. Apart from rushing to the field to test out their new skill, you can't help but want to see how they will interact with your current party and what are their backstories like. And I wasn't alone. Although only one person could play the games, approximately 10 of us has gathered around the TV. That's when it's dawned on to me that I need to acquire the guidebook and embark on my own Final Fantasy IX adventure. And that's precisely what I did. And the rest is history. After meeting all the unique characters, each with their own set of problem and background to contend with, I discovered why some characters could relate to one another's and drawn strength from shared experience. Others faced challenges so specific that fellow party members had little advice to offer. Yet, simply by being part of the group, this character learned and grew immensely. 50 hours later, I found myself facing the final boss, and it wasn't even the most challenging one in the games. However, each time the boss cast a spell, I sat at the edge of my seat, unsure my party member would survive. And with every successful strike I landed on the boss, I knew I was getting closer to my goal. Despite the absence of an HP display, I was certain that the victory was within reach if I kept landing a blow. And then... as a credit roll, I experienced a unique sense of fulfillment. I had completed other games in the past, but this fulfillment was different. It felt as though I had committed myself to something extraordinary and seen it through to the very end. To this day, Final Fantasy IX remains my first love and I still replay it. However, language barrier persists as the guide only provides a basic story without delving into the exact dialogue, but all that is about to change. In the same year that Final Fantasy IX was released, the PlayStation 2 also made its debut. But honestly, I was still all about enjoying my PlayStation 1 game. That is, until I once again caught sight of one of my friends playing the newly released Final Fantasy X. But what different is that this time? I did not really have to ask what game it was. Everything felt so familiar, yet improved. It's nearly like seeing a friends that you haven't seen for a while, and now they have grown up a bit more mature. And as my English has improved to the point where I could somewhat comprehend the language, I made sure that when I purchased the PS2 and Final Fantasy X, it was in English. However, I still have a long way to go in terms of my English skill, so I made sure to acquire the unofficial guide as well. As I loaded up the games, the screen remained dark. But when the first musical notes resonates, I could already sense that this would be the sad yet beautiful tale. I witnessed the group of characters I had yet to meet sitting around a small bonfire, gazing with each other with the defeated expression. A voice whose name I had not yet learned ascended a small cliff and uttered,
"Listen to my story. This may be our last chance."
As the title fades in, it's drawn onto me that This was the first time the character has voice dialogue. And not only that, it was the first time I truly understand what they were saying. From that day forward, all I could think about was school being over so I could return and play Final Fantasy X. Additionally, I had moved from the dormitory to our new house. However, my mother has set a rule that we were not allowed to play video game more than 2 consecutive hours, making a long gaming session impossible. As annoying as that sounds, it made every gaming session feel all the more spatial. And before I knew it, nearly a month has passed since I started, and I had finally reached the bonfire scene. I'm sure most people know the story up to this point, but for those who haven't played, I'll continue the story keeping it as vague as possible. As I approach the ruin of Sanakans, the familiar melody played, but this time, the rendition evoked a heavy sorrowful feeling. And with each step I took toward the ruins, a part of me wanted to halt. I no longer care about saving the world. I believe what we had achieved thus far was remarkable, and I didn't even want to know what would happen next. The controller, which I has held for over 30 hours, had never felt heavier. But I press on, defeating enemies that appear one after another, occasionally looting items from chests. I reached the entrance. Upon spotting the save point, I approached and saved my progress. Then, I turned off the games and didn't return to it for another 2 to 3 months. This action of me turning the game off with reluctance only happened twice in my entire life. The first time was with Final Fantasy X, and the second was with Okami. Nier Automata could have been my third, but since I was streaming the game, I had to press on. My mother laughed at me though, deeming it foolish that I was so engrossed in the video games. But I didn't mind. It had overwhelmed me. And for the first time, I was able to understand most of the story. I even cried, to be honest. Cause eventually, I made a decision to complete the games. And while the ending stung, I felt proud of myself for accomplishing it. From then on, since my English continued to improve, I delved into more JRPG on the PS2. And believe me, if you're part of that era, you understand just how amazing it was to be a JRPG enthusiast during the PS2 era. However, little did I know that the future has a different path in store, as I eagerly wait for the next Final Fantasy to hit the store.
It's time.
2006 came and with it Final Fantasy XII. While it may not be a terrible game, it doesn't quite reach the level of greatness either. Interestingly, this is the first game in the series that moved away from the turn-based battle. However, it still retained much of the familiar essence when it's come to world buildings, and I must admit that Ramanesta in particular stand out as one of the best city ever created in the entire series. Its sheer size and impressive architecture, coupled with the lively atmosphere and the NPC that actually roam about, make it remarkable. But it doesn't end there. The entire games, in terms of art and music, is extremely polished and truly bring the world to life, pushing the PS2 to its limits. Sadly, the same cannot be said about the story and the character. While some of them boast a cool design, they lack the charm found in the older installment. Additionally, this marked the first main title that I did not complete during my initial playthrough. Despite acquiring better language skill, something seemed to be different about it. And it's not just the battle system, but what is it? Is it the fact that it's not true turn-based game? Or that the boss and enemy HP are now visible? Or is it something else? Nearly 4 years later, Final Fantasy XIII was released, and while the game sold well, the review was extremely lackluster. But it would take me a couple of years before I got to play it myself. While I actually enjoyed the combat, and yes I know, many don't, something feel even more missing. The planning phase, such as buff and debuff, is replaced by the automation of role switching. It's strange because technically it's the same thing. The main difference being that I apply those buff and debuff manually one by one, and now it's automatically done for me. Furthermore, the fact that most of the game level feel like boring hallway or boxes, while it's hard to disagree, doesn't bother me too much, since apart from the world map, I usually enjoy the map being mostly linear like in Final Fantasy X anyway, with some split here and there of course. But what hit me really hard in this game is the Tao. In the older Final Fantasy, one of the things I look forward to is reaching a new Tao. I would usually rush to the weapon shop to check what's new, and along the way, I would admire the structure of the Tao, as they are all very unique from one another. And it's not just the visual, different Tao also come with their own memorable themes. And while I understand that Final Fantasy 13 Tao are more modern, so they are more the same, I can't help but look at Final Fantasy 10, where most Tao are just built as tropical seaside Tao, but there is always something that sets them apart. Technically, Besaid Islands are very similar to Kilika. However, after Sin attack, I will always remember Kilika as that city or that Tao that Sin destroyed, and not just another tropical looking village. We have a lot of interesting locations like Moonflow, Thunder Plain, and many more. And for the characters in Final Fantasy 13, while I actually like their design, I feel like the only interesting one is this guy with the bird on his head. It's sort of the reverse from when I played Final Fantasy 9, where everyone was pretty interesting to me, except this guy. Fast forward to the present, as more and more Final Fantasy is being released, I felt less and less familiar with it. And while I enjoy and complete most of them, that sense of wonders and excitement I once experienced as a child seemed to have faded away. You see, to me, Final Fantasy is not solely defined by its combat system, character, or lore. It's the combination of all of these elements, and while I can't fully explain it right now, and I may never will since it's all can just be nostalgia talking, when I see a Final Fantasy game, I know it's a Final Fantasy games. Well, at least I used to. As mentioned at the beginning, I am not trying to compare this game or declaring what game is better or worse. All I'm saying is that it feels like I've lost a dear friends who I used to know so well. Now that Final Fantasy 16 has been released, learning that you weren't able to control your party member make my heart sing. And I'm not alone. Many fans of the old style Final Fantasy share the same sentiments. If you're still holding on to hope that old Final Fantasy will return, well, I think Final Fantasy 16 has sealed the coffin. I realized that the friends I used to know is no more. And while I wanted to join those who continue to voice their frustration to Square Enix, asking them to go back to their way, I think it's better if we step back and look at the bigger picture here. Final Fantasy hasn't been exactly the same since Final Fantasy 12, and it hasn't been able to regain a strong hold on the modern gamer as it once did. But as they kept releasing newer titles, learning from their mistake, and trying out new things, we finally get a Final Fantasy game that I universally love again. As a fan of the series, I couldn't be more happier. It is also then that I realized that while these new games are not the same as the one I used to play, they represent the future and the offspring of the Final Fantasy. The friends that I grow up with. And I don't want to be one of those people who cling on to the past. Instead, I want to be one of those who supports and embraces the direction that this new generation of Final Fantasy will take. That said, while many popular titles have had to adapt to stay relevant, not all is lost. A devoted group of old school JRPG enthusiasts exists. Large publishers like Square Enix seem to have recognized this, responding by releasing remastered edition of beloved gems from the past. Alongside the remastering endeavor, they also published the work of smaller studios that cater to the nostalgic sensibilities of JRPG enthusiasts. This profound revelation deeply resonated with me, affirming that JRPG I once adored, while they may not be in high demand in the mainstream anymore, still exist and thrive. There is no argument that there were so many great JRPG from the past, but the one that I connected with the most is Final Fantasy series. But what about you?